Who's had a bad week?
Yeah, so this is a story from last week, so it is kind of last week's news, but I want to talk about it, so I'm going with it. This week's bad week goes to Slovakia, where, as of last week, restaurants can legally put bear meat on the menu if it meets health and safety standards. Have you ever eaten bear meat?
I haven't. That sounds like it's something we shouldn't be eating.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to be one of these, people. I don't want us to get complaints from, game eaters and roadkill eaters and people like that who argue that it's judgmental or Western-centric to say, oh, you eat bear, gross. I'm not going to give Slovakia a bad week because I think bears are cute and we shouldn't eat cute animals.
Why not?
I don't like being judgy about this kind of thing. I'm not one of these people who's like, ooh, eating that kind of meat is weird in my culture. So you're a bad person if you eat it. It's more about where this bear meat is coming from and why the bears are going to be ending up on people's plates in the first place. And that is because the meat that the Slovakian government has just authorized for sale is the meat that's going to come from a major cull of Slovakia's bear population. Up to a quarter of the country's bears, which currently number about 1,300.
Oh, is the government allowed to do that? Aren't bears a protected species?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Brown bears are a protected species, and that is the case across the EU. We have this law called the EU Habitats Directive, and under that, all across the European Union, bears are only allowed to be killed in really strictly regulated circumstances and when there's no alternative to killing them. And these animals are protected because they bring really important benefits to Europe's ecosystem. It is good to have big predators around. For example, they eat other animals like deer that might otherwise be overpopulated. They help keep the soil of the forest floor in balance. They also, I didn't know this, but they can be really helpful in controlling the population of ticks. You know, those little bugs that carry some quite serious diseases.
I do know.
So we need to have bears and other big predators around. And so the fact that their population has bounced back in Europe from being nearly extinct about 30 years ago due to hunting and the destruction of their habitats, to a situation where there's something like 20,000 bears across the EU these days, this is generally celebrated by environmentalists as a really good thing, even if it means that we have to figure out ways of living with them, and even if it means that burden, of course, falls almost entirely on rural communities. But yeah, since Slovakia is part of the EU, the Slovak government isn't allowed to just order a mass killing of up to 350 of them unless they can show that they have exhausted all other options for dealing with the bears. But that is nonetheless what they have pledged to do, kill up to 350 of them. Now, the European Commission has so far declined to confirm that this plan is illegal. They said that they're still looking at Slovakia's plans. But some Slovak conservationists, at least, have come out and said that they think the government is going to be in breach of this EU law if they go ahead with this plan. But anyway, yeah, since they are planning to go ahead and kill hundreds of bears, the government has said, well, you know what? Waste not, want not. Let's authorize this meat for sale. Bear meat is safe to eat. A bear can weigh 600 kilograms, so there's potentially going to be tons of this meat available. Let's not just throw it away. And arguably this bit of the policy is actually good policy because it's true. It would be super wasteful otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. But is there even a culture of eating bear meat in Slovakia?
Not really at all, as far as I can tell. In fact, it's difficult to find anywhere in Europe that really does have a culture of eating bear. There are a couple of pockets of Croatia where there's limited legal hunting of bears, where you can find bear pate on the menu in some mountain villages. Similarly, in Finland and Sweden, there is a quota of bears that can be hunted every year, and you will find some hunters and their families eating the meat. But it's not something that the average person would have tried. It's pretty tough meat, apparently. It's difficult to cook well. There's also a risk of bear meat being infected with trichinella, these worms that can make you pretty sick, actually. So if you are going to cook bear meat anytime soon, Dominic, make sure that your meat thermometer gets to at least 70 degrees for the internal meat temperature. Okay?
Okay, good to know. But can we go back to the fact that Slovakia has decided to kill all of these bears in the first place?
Yeah.
Why is it doing that?
Well, there have unfortunately been a couple of fatal incidents over the past couple of years involving bears in Slovakia. And scary interactions between humans and bears have been rising in general in the country. So it's understandably become a political issue. The government announced the cull in April, not long after a man really sadly got mauled to death while walking in the forest near Detva in the middle of the country. There was also a young woman last year who fell into a ravine while she was being chased by a bear. She also died. A really, really horrible case. So, these incidents are very scary, and the government understandably wants to look like it is doing something about it. However, this is kind of a classic culture war issue, right? So you have a populist government saying, we're going to listen to the people. The people in these communities are telling us that they don't want there to be so many bears. So let's just shoot them. Never mind all of this hand-wringing about biodiversity, blah, blah, blah. This is a common sense policy. However, this does feel like a quite typical example of populist policymaking based on gut feelings about what instinctively feels right. Because if you read what Slovak conservationists are saying, they will tell you that the reason that these incidents are happening more and more is because of things that humans are doing. And there are much better ways of dealing with the problem than just killing the bears. With all of that negative impact on Slovakia's biodiversity and ecosystem that just getting rid of them would bring. So there's a Slovak nonprofit called Ursia, which tries to educate people about bears. And they have pointed out that these really scary interactions between humans and bears, they tend to happen in areas where hunters lay bait. Not necessarily laying bait, to attract bears, but just to attract animals to hunt in general. And these bait sites are often near residential areas. And, bears are pretty clever. They will seek out places that have food and keep going there. So they're being drawn towards areas of human habitation by stuff that humans are doing. Environmental activists have also pointed out that Slovakia has already loosened the rules to make it easier to kill bears in areas near where humans live. Last year, 144 bears were killed, 94 of them as part of a culling intended specifically to bring the size of the population down. That is a record in Slovakia. And yet, despite that record culling, these interactions between bears and humans, they keep happening, some of them fatal. And that does suggest that there is something to this argument by the conservationists that the evidence that we have, it doesn't really suggest that culling is going to help. And that what we actually need is better education about how to live with bears and other policy solutions that don't involve killing them. But yeah, it's very easy for right-wingers to paint this as an example of, like woke environmentalists banging on about biodiversity, people that live in cities who don't have to deal themselves with the consequences of having these scary predators on their doorsteps, complaining that, we must protect the bears. And yeah, I do understand that instinct to eye roll, specifically at urban people like me who live really far away from where this is actually happening. But the people who study bears really do argue quite consistently that culling isn't the best way to deal with this. It is a knee-jerk response. And I don't know, call me old-fashioned, but I think sometimes it's best to listen to the experts who spend all day thinking about this.
People will probably think they're arrogant because they know lots of facts.
Stupid experts.
So did you say that hunters put bait down in areas where humans live in Slovakia, and that's one of the things that's drawing bears to those places where humans live?
Yeah, exactly. Not necessarily in the city centre, but areas on the edges of villages and towns, I guess, yeah.
Presumably, the hunters that are doing that could stop doing that.
Yes, and to the Slovak government's credit, that is in fact part of their new anti-bear plan, apparently, getting rid of all of these bait sites near towns and also issuing clear guidelines on how to deal with a bear if you encounter one. Those things, they seem like good policy that everyone can get behind. Killing a quarter of the national bear population? Maybe less so.
Are there examples of countries or places within countries that are handling this better?
Yeah, so if you look a little further southeast in Slovakia, Romania is a really interesting place to compare it to because bears have become a really similar political issue, actually, and part of the culture wars in the same way, but on a much bigger scale. Romania has way more bears than any other country in the EU. The latest governments actually suggest there are significantly more than we previously thought in the country, maybe 10 to 12,000 bears. And there's been a similar increase in recent years in Romania in people having these violent interactions with bears. And the political response has been pretty similar to Slovakia's, to be honest. Romania's government has started allowing the hunting of many more bears. And very similarly to Slovakia, that policy has been met with dismay by conservationists who have argued that culling is a really blunt policy instrument. And that a big part of the problem, again, is that our own behaviour is drawing bears closer to human habitats. So in Romania's case, there's a lot of tourism around bears, like it's become a decent business. And the tour operators want happy customers, you know? They want to make sure that the tourists definitely get to see a bear. So they will typically lay down food for the bears to attract them. You can also find a ton of videos online of tourists feeding bears from their cars in Romania. And that is definitely going to keep the bears coming back to certain areas and getting a taste for human food. So it's kind of the same thing as the bait being laid down by hunters in Slovakia, you know? Like this is human behavior that actively encourages bears to seek out humans and their food. So yeah, there's really similar issues between these two countries. There has been an increase in bear attacks in Romania over the last 20 years or so. Human activity is a major factor in that. And yet the political response has been to just focus on killing more bears, much to the frustration of wildlife activists. However, there is one really interesting example of good practice in Romania. It's a town called Băile Tușnad. It is in Transylvania. And this town has been internationally recognized as having like a really smart bear policy. They do several things. One of them is a focus on like particularly problematic bears that keep venturing into town, which experts say is apparently really important. I do kind of think that if I was a bear, I would be one of these problem bears.
I think so too.
Like venturing into town, going through the bins and then attacking people if they try to stop me. I feel quite a strong recognition for this behavior. Anyway, the town has an intervention team that identifies quote unquote problem bears and relocates them far from town. They've also done some quite radical things like cutting down fruit trees if they're not protected by electric fences. Because if you don't do that, the bears are going to come into the garden to try to get fruit from the trees. So there is a lot of electric fencing in this town, which is annoying to live with. But hey, it works. They also use sound deterrents at the town's entrance points to scare the bears away. And, this is crucial, to stop bears from going through the trash looking for food, they have these special bear-proof bins, which are actually made in Slovakia. So, you know, maybe Robert Fico's government should just support a local business and buy a ton of trash cans from this Slovak company. But yeah, generally this policy seems to have been working super, super well in this town. It has reduced the problem of bears coming into the town and causing trouble to basically zero. So this can be done well. We can find ways of coexisting peacefully with predators. And as I said at the start of this segment, it is unclear right now whether the current Slovak government plan, which is focused on killing a quarter of its bear population, will even be considered legal under EU law. Mm-hmm. When the Romanian government wanted to kill more bears, they did manage to work out a plan that the EU was okay with. And it's possible that something similar will be done in Slovakia. But in the meantime, for this plan that seems to be not very evidence-based, but which may allow you to eat bear meat at a restaurant in Bratislava sometime soon, bad week goes to the Slovak government.
Oh, I thought bad week was going to the bears themselves.
Oh, them too.